Welcome to Mac and Blue, the cutting-edge podcast for the nation's builders, merging the realms of construction with exciting advancements in technology. Join us on a thrilling journey where we delve into the dynamic world of blockchain, AI, the metaverse, virtual and augmented reality, and their transformative impact on the industry. Our engaging discussions span a wide spectrum, covering not only construction, economic development, supply chain, and market segments, but also exploring the vibrant tapestry of diversity within the construction landscape. We shed light on the intersection of local politics and its profound influence on the construction sector, while championing the remarkable contributions of women and minorities in construction. For all things Mac and Blue, head to www.macandblue.com, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. I'm your host, JJ Levinsky. Now let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mac and Blue. I'm your host, JJ Levinsky, president and co-founder of Blue Wave. I am elated today because I am fortunate enough, or we are fortunate enough, to have Marian Salzman on. I will get into her bio in a minute and a whole bunch of background of why I reached out to her. But just to give, I actually have to read her resume, pedigree, all that kind of fun, happy stuff. She's currently the Senior Vice President and Chief Corporate Citizenship Officer for Philip Morris International. We'll use PMI as the acronym going forward, so I don't have to say Philip Morris. Marian is no stranger to the limelight. We're very fortunate to have her on. And as a little bit of a background before I get into some more questions, I do want to let the audience know, here's what happened a couple months ago. I was channel surfing one night, and PBS had a special one called Beyond the Now. And it had, going into the description of, is it Ari? I can't pronounce his last name. I can't remember it. I think he was a New York guy. And his family, he was a self-described futurist. His family had survived the Holocaust, and just a great story. Anyway, he went around the world interviewing futurists. And for those of you that know me, know that I'm on the spectrum and kind of a wackadoodle myself. So the way I think, nonlinear fashion, I like to find people that are on the fringe. And when I saw this PBS special, it just really dug deep into me how it wasn't what I was expecting. And so I had stereotyped and kind of was thinking myopically about what a futurist is. And after that special, I started Googling, and Marian's name came up. And I thought, what the hell, I'm going to shoot for the stars and see if she would respond, because this, looking at all the things that she's predicted in her life and with the description of a futurist. So everyone, that's the background of why Marian's on today. So she can talk probably for hours about all the cool stuff that we're going to go into. So without further ado, Marian, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And if you would just, we're regional, national, but primarily the audience is based in the Southwest. Can you just let everyone know you actually have Arizona connection, do you not?
I do. I consider myself a Tucsonian who has been dislocated for the last 6.5 years. We've lived in Tucson going back to about 2011, 2012, and it's where I consider home. It's where my husband has been teaching at the University of Arizona, Rogers College of Law for the last several years. 2 kids in the family are Wildcats, so very much. Oh yes, I know. Are you going to be an ASU person?
No. I'm a transplant from the Midwest, so you don't have to worry about me.
Because I feel like every time I sit down at dinner in Arizona, it turns into Sun Devils versus Wildcats, and you never can win.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the Arizona connection. Let me read just a little bit more, and then we'll start into the fun stuff. So this is right off her LinkedIn page. So I normally don't do this, but I think it sets a better tone than me just trying to regurgitate it from memory. Marian Salzman is a global thought leader, trendspotter, and communications pro who has built her career on helping companies and brands anticipate the future ahead of the competition and find their sweet spot. Over 3 decades, she's only 40, so don't worry. She has existed at the cusp of emerging cultural shifts, including introducing the world to Metro-sexuality in 2003, sparking a global media frenzy that resulted in metrosexual being named Word of the Year. I can't wait to talk about that one. And serving as a driving force behind Giving Tuesday, an annual event that has spread to 60 countries, raising tens of billions of dollars for community programs. I could go on and on, but anyway, Marian's the real deal. So with that, Marian, I thought I'd do one other thing, and that is because I was humbled by this, I wanted to read what a futurist is by definition. And it says the term futurist most commonly refers to people who attempt to understand the future, sometimes called trend analysis, such as authors, consultants, and thinkers. With that, explain, let's reverse engineer it. Let's go to your most recent thing, which is PMI, Philip Morris International. And I love kind of the story behind it of, I don't think you were looking, and they sought you out. And who would have thought that someone with all your background, which we'll get into, but how, just explain, I don't even know how to put that into words.
Okay. So let's start with the fact, not only am I not someone who would ever have contemplated this, I'm a never smoker, and I came into it very much anti-smoking. I'd worked, and whenever I'd gone near the cigarette world in the past, I'd always been on the anti-smoking side. I got a call in the summer of 2017. It's funny because you mentioned Tucson. My family had just gone back to Arizona. For the first time in a really long time, I was going to go back into a New York City apartment. I thought this was absolutely perfect. We had an office in Phoenix. I was running Havas PR. We had an office in Phoenix, offices in Paris, London, New York, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, this is the life. This is absolutely perfect. I'll go home 1 week of the month. I'll work out of the Phoenix office and I'll be able to live in the city again. And I got this call from this headhunter who was like talking to me about this job. And I was like, number one, I'm not really looking for a job. Number two, as you're describing it, I don't do cigarettes. My dad had died from lung cancer. I'm not at all interested. I was completely sort of almost put off. They had the nerve to call me because I'm like, did they not do their homework? It's funny because I went back to our New York City apartment and I started Google. I think I phoned my family and I was like, you're never going to believe how insulted I am, blah, blah, blah. And I guess my husband was in front of Google because he's like, Marian, do you know what you're talking about? I'm like, yeah, I'm talking about this company. He's like, you should look at their website before you say anything else. And I did really like the headhunter had called me. I knew her a little bit. I knew their firm a lot. And I was like, look, I'm going to have to be polite. So I called her back the next day and said, like, I know I'm never going to get the job. Nothing about my background lends itself to working for a tobacco company. But if it will help you out, I'll go into the interview process and then they'll just cut me because they're going to cut me. And so I went in completely skeptical. I wasn't looking for another job. I had a job I liked. I had a boss I adored. I had a team I adored, kind of around the world. And as I got more into it, I kind of came to this conclusion that if you wanted people to quit smoking, you needed to work inside a tobacco company to put tobacco profits into getting people to change their behaviors. And as I began to learn about the science of the smoke-free product portfolio, I became more and more intrigued. But let me explain to you, this was like birthing an elephant. This did not happen over a week or a month.
Without an epidural?
The conversation began, back to school in Arizona starts early. So let's say it was mid-August, the end of August. I finally kind of begrudgingly went to meet with them in October. And then I really thought they were wonderful, amazing people. But I was still like, yeah, I don't really need a job. Yeah, I don't really want a job. Yeah, I don't really want to move to Switzerland. I had been expatriated for a large chunk of my career, but I was like, you know what? Tucson is our home now. It's kind of where I want to be. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But I kept talking. And I kept getting more and more and more intrigued about what you could actually do to get people to quit cigarettes. And then suddenly I'm in Tucson. It's like New Year's Eve. And the headhunter calls me and she said, there's one last thing you're going to need to do and they're going to make you an offer. And I'm like, what? Like, I couldn't really process it. And it's that horrible time in Arizona where it snows for like 1.5 days a year. And I was like, you want me to go to a place where it's going to snow all winter? Like, I really don't understand. And she's like, Marian, just go with it because the next and the final round is going to be this psychological analysis. They're probably going to say you're too rebellious, you're too free-spirited, whatever. And then you won't get the job. And then our headhunting firm will love you and you'll get something else whenever you want it in the future. And I kind of went into it. And by the 15th of January, I'd accepted the job.
Oh, wow.
And I gave my notice to Havas, where I'd been working for many, many years, where I completely adored the people. And they're like, Marian, you have to give us a longer notice period because we need to replace you. So I moved to Lausanne, Switzerland on the 17th of April of that year. And it's been actually the most interesting and fulfilling period in my professional life because every single day I'm confronted with a new challenge. I'm certainly forced to look into that crystal ball and understand what the world's going to be like in 2030 and beyond. I have the luxury of having worked for one CEO and then managing a CEO transition. Our former CEO is now our chairman, and our current CEO spoke last spring, a year ago, in London, and he said something that really blew my mind in a positive way. He said he looks forward to the day when his children and grandchildren need to find out what a cigarette is by going to find them in museums. So I joined a company that was around 90% cigarette revenues. Today it's about 68% cigarette revenues. Obviously, cigarette use around the world is in decline. And it's been really a wonderful and interesting experience. It's also really interesting, honestly, to be American, to be Southwestern in orientation, to be a woman, sitting on the senior executive leadership team of a multinational, a truly international company, I should say, that's now learning to be American again. I moved back to the U.S. Officially January of this year to take over the global citizenship role. But before that, for 6 years, I'd been the senior vice president of global communications, kind of sitting in Lausanne, traveling the world. So one day I'd wake up, I'd be in Kazakhstan. The next day I'd wake up, I'd be in Sydney. The next day I'd be in Germany. And then I would spend buckets of time back in the U.S. trying to understand the American market. And I had the luxury of really watching what happened over the course of the election, over the course of the whole 2020 period, with the luxury of being someplace else. So being able to look from the outside in. And I say that because one of the best things about being a trend spotter is you are always a foreigner in your own land, because you're always looking at life through the lens of what happened retrospectively. So you look a lot in the rearview mirror, and then you're looking prospectively, but you almost never live in the now. And the benefit of being an expat is you're not in anybody's now. You're foreign in the place you're living. You're also foreign when you come home.
So Marian, go back. Okay, thank you I love the description, the kind of the PMI story. But now I want to go full circle the other way, is because you kind of ended it with the trend spotting.
There comes a time when dreams become a reality, when you see your vision materialize into a true work of art. And the only way to get there is to choose a general contractor who shares that same vision and knows how to bring it to life. At Blue Wave, we aren't so big that we've forgotten where we've come from, and we aren't so small that we can't care for your projects regardless of their size. When your vision deserves safety, perfection, timeliness, and expertise in order to become a reality, trust Blue Wave to get it done right the first time.
How did you know you were different? Was it at a young age? Was it high school? Was it until you got to college? Like when did you realize that you could see things differently than others?
So I should have realized it when I was young. And the only reason I say that is in one of the many international moves, and we still have boxes in our garage in Tucson that say Marian 1997, because I never truly unpacked when I came back from the Netherlands after a long stint there. I found in one of these boxes.
Oh, so you're one of those hoarders.
No, I'm not a hoarder. I never unpacked. What's really even funnier is my boxes from Switzerland. 3 of them arrived in my office like a month and a half ago. And this afternoon I had 2 minutes and I started unpacking them and I just stopped because I was like, why do I need the past? It's like, 'cause I'm always living in the present and future. But anyway, in this box, I found the application I'd made in 1977 to the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. And they asked me to forecast what would be the biggest issue at my 25th reunion. And I wrote about global terrorism.
No way.
1970s. No. We all sat around reading this. And I'm like, okay, I guess I really had this skill when I was young. But it's a kind of a funny story because I'd gone through a phase. I'm like a person. I'm very sporty, but I'm also very nerdy. And I used to ride my bike to the library every day when I was at home in the summer. And I guess I got into this whole thing about reading about the Symbionese Liberation Army, Patty Hearst and the kidnapping, the SLA, Black Panthers. It was this whole thing that I'd become very, very intrigued by. And it sort of turned me on to the idea that sometimes great provocateurs really push the envelope and utilize violence. So I guess going back to being a high school senior, I must have had this skill. I really didn't know I had it until I was in my late 20s. I was doing a lot of market research, and people would ask me to extrapolate from the data, from the quant data, what are the patterns I'm seeing and what might it mean in the future? And it was really client-driven. I've always been employed. I mean, I had a short stint as an entrepreneur, but I've always been employed by either large agency companies and then obviously PMI, but we're, again, very, very big brands. So people would ask me, what's going to sell in 2 years? What's going to sell in 3 years? What's going to sell in 5 years? And I did a phenomenal project called Citizens of Cyberspace going back to 1995, Citizens of Cyberspace. And I was completely convinced that the online world was going to be a parallel universe to our place-based world. And I had all this data, but I was able to extrapolate out a vision, which, like, I didn't come all the way to the point of TikTok, which, by the way, I have an addiction to TikTok. But I come all the way. I only allow myself 1 hour, and I set it on my iPhone to make myself the alarm ring, so I stop watching because I'm golden retriever obsessed, so I completely crawl down the hole of watching other people's dogs. So look, I guess it was innate. I'm a data-driven person, and I would look for patterns, and I would always look for the emerging minority. So I was interested at the very, very extreme end of the bell curve. So to me, Madonna is super interesting because she's not a trendsetter. She's a trend spreader. And so I would look at people like that would take things that were happening on the true fringe and bring them to a place where people would copy them, emulate them, and bring them into the mainstream.
So in those early days then, if I can ask, did people look to you almost in like shock and awe? Did they keep digging, or were you ostracized almost because of it?
I was never, ever ostracized. But I mean, look, you're looking at me so you can see now I'm a 65-year-old, very preppy, very athletic woman. I mean, it's like, no, I think because I look so normal, people would be like, wait, that's the girl. Or in those days, they would say, girl, that's the one with the crystal ball. They would be so surprised that someone who looks so conventional and is sort of sounded conventional and kind of looked like the person next door, that I would be the one coming out with these sightings. I think that usually usually trends people are very trendy. I was more a trends person that looked and acted much more conventionally.
Interesting. Do you mind, hopefully I'm not offending you by asking you this question, is you've published about your health problems with the brain tumors and stuff like that. Do you think, describe to the audience how that's impacted you, both physically, mentally, spiritually? Like, do you think are there connections? Like, and I don't mean to dig too deep here, but what was that movie with John Travolta where he saw everything and then they realized he had a brain tumor? Like, have you actually been tested? Is there biochemistry involved here? I have to ask the question.
No, okay. You probably want to start with, how did I find out I had so I'm probably a victim of 9/11. I was downtown in New York City when 9/11 happened. I didn't leave. I stayed there for several weeks. I was living on the Lower East Side. Ironically, I'd come back from Egypt the day before, where I'd been snorkeling for 3 weeks. So you come back from Egypt and then you walk into a terrorist attack in your very safe New York City. In 2005, I was going to do I was doing trend segments on Good Morning America, and I'd just come back from India. And I had a really bad cold, but they said to me, Marian, we can't keep booking you unless you get your eyes done. This is like already, obviously, many, many years ago. I haven't had my eyes done since then, but my eye was drooping, and they were like, and I said, I don't know why I blurted this out at my makeup artist, but I said, I'm sure I have a brain tumor. So once you say something that profoundly, you got to go to an eye doctor and get checked. So I went the next day to an eye doctor in a suburban town in Connecticut where I had a weekend house, and I walked into the doctor's office and I said, this is an emergency. I have a brain tumor. And the doctor's nurse said to me, you and every other middle-aged woman in Fairfield County. Okay. So they go to me, they give me this examination, and they're like, no, you have dry eye from all the flying. And I'm like, no, I have a brain tumor. I can feel it growing. So literally, to get me out of the office, they gave me a prescription to go get a brain scan. And I went and got a brain scan. And the next day I'm at work at my ad agency, J. Walter Thompson. And this doctor phones me and he said, well, do you want the good or the bad news? And I said, well, why don't we start off with the good news? He said, well, I was wrong. You don't have dry eye. You don't have an infection. I said, well, what's the bad news? And he said, well, you have a 3-point whatever tumor. And I said, well, I told you that yesterday. So instead of being really, really devastated and upset, I was like, I tried to tell you yesterday. So I guess I kind of knew that, so I've had three brain tumors, and I've had for the last, and now I'm in remission, but I've had since October of 22, I was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. But in a weird way, these things are just issues that just happen in my life. I mean, look, I've had the luxury of always having a large corporate employer. I've had magnificent health insurance. I've had the aptitude and maybe the contact base to get the best medical care in the world. So I know so many people, and so many people's stories don't end up happily. My hair is growing back. If the worst thing that ever happens to you is that your skull looks like a highway with all tracks on it from all the places it's been repaired, and all your hair fell out. I mean, the only good news is it grew back blonde. It didn't grow back gray. So, I mean, I guess I have this very positive attitude. I mean, for me, the 7 months I was in quarantine because of the issues going on in the world and obviously when you have when you have chemo and immuno, that you have to be very, very protective of your immune system. So instead of being upset by those 7 months, even though I was literally in a room in Connecticut, only one person could kind of see me, except for during those periods when I was hospitalized, I saw it as this really positive experience, because in a 24-hour day, I would work between 7 and 10 hours a day. I would sleep. I watched endless amounts of reality TV. It was the first time in my adult life I hadn't had to hop on a plane at least twice a month. So I saw it all. And also, the other thing was, as someone who's my whole life counted calories, all of a sudden a doctor told me to eat chocolate pudding as much as I wanted. Like, how much better can I get? I had lost about 20 or 25 pounds from the cancer. So they were like, just do whatever you can to bulk up. So it was licensed to eat. It was licensed to watch reality TV. Nobody could ask me to do anything. I started working out online with an online Pilates instructor, so I could work out, I could eat, I could work. And look, the world had gone so virtual by then. I could go to every meeting I wanted to go to via teleconference, and I would put on my little itchy wig. And then I got so lazy, I just started wearing a ski cap. And so now I think that now that I'm back and completely healthy, people are like, oh my God, were you ever really sick? And I always flash them my cancer report to prove to them I really was, because people are like, you look so healthy again. But so was it spiritual? I wouldn't say it was spiritual. It was really, I said, such a positive attitude, because I knew how much luckier I was than so many people who were struck by these diseases, because I didn't have financial vulnerability, and I had access to just amazing, amazing physicians and amazing support from wonderful employers. I mean, it's one of the reasons I love Philip Morris so much.
So I have to ask, with the skill sets and the blessings that you were born with and acquired and worked on over all these years that put you on the map, were there times, even through your own personal journey here on the health side, where you could actually process the data, see the future? Is that what put you at ease? I mean, wouldn't I?
Because I love data. So I knew, even though, I was stage 4, but Hodgkin's lymphoma is the best kind of lymphoma to get. So I knew I had a 92% survival rate had I been caught at stage 1 or 2. I knew that it dropped down to like 80%. But let's face it, if someone told you have 8 out of 10 chances of winning the lottery, you're going to go buy that ticket at the gas station, right? So I never really thought about dying. It was more like, okay, when I get back to the real world, here are 10 things I want to do. And I started focusing much more on, okay, so it's October, my chemo is going to run till the beginning of April. Then I had a really bad pneumonia, so it got pushed back by 2 more weeks. I just had this date of April 18th in my life. And I focused on April 18th is going to be my day of freedom. I didn't realize your immune system doesn't come back for 3 more weeks. But I kept thinking about it. It really, I kind of distilled it to numeric. And then a lot of trend forecasting is binary. It's either A or B. And so I was like, well, I'm going to live, so I have to choose option A. And in the middle, you're going to laugh. In the middle of the whole thing, I started watching the mortgage rates. Mortgage rates were increasing. Real estate prices were still increasing. I made my husband sell the first house we had in Tucson to buy another house because I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to get well and go back to this house I don't like. So literally there's actually a funny story to this. So I had this pneumonia, as I said, so I was in the ICU in the hospital. And we had to call a notary to sign our mortgage papers. So the notary showed up thinking it was somebody's will and they were going to die. And there was me with papers spread out all over my bed, having calculated how to do this mortgage, blah, blah, blah. And the guy came in and he's like, this isn't a will. I'm like, no, this is a house purchase. He's like, you're in the ICU. I'm like, right, but I'm getting out. I'll be out by April. And I need to be sure that I wanted to move. We were living out east in Tucson. I wanted to move back downtown near the university. I was like, no, I have this house. I need to buy it and it needs to get renovated while I'm ill. And the guy's looking at me like, there's something the matter with you, lady?
Oh.
My papers. That's the other thing. I work the whole time. So I walk around with these 2 iPhones and I brought my computer with me to the hospital whenever I'd have to go. And I never turned off. But there's something you learn when you're in this 24-hour bubble, that 24 hours is this wonderful thing. And all of us approach 24 hours right now with an agrarian head. You go to sleep when it gets dark, you wake up when it gets light. But suddenly during this cancer period, I had 24 hours that I needed to fill, and I needed to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep for my health. But that leaves like 14 hours to fill.
You do a lot.
Amazing things you can do in 14 hours, including hobbyist things. So I could work for 7, 8, 9 hours. I could watch TV. I could start researching things. I mean, the internet was an extraordinary companion. Also, because of WhatsApp and all these other tools, my friends from all over the world were visiting me every day. And it didn't matter where people were. And because I'm such an international person, I had friends in every time zone. So if I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I could call my best Dutch friend who would be in Switzerland and start talking to her on WhatsApp. And there'd be someone awake for me pretty much. The only time I really didn't, because I even had people out in the West. So even at midnight, it was only 9 o'clock in Tucson. So I could always find somebody to talk to or text with.
I love that story. Marian, just trying to keep an eye on the time. I want to ask one question. I want to dive into some really the heart of the matter of what I want to pick your brain on and what I want the audience to connect with you on some of the trends, just to get dialogue going. So I want people to walk away from this podcast where they want to go research some of the things that you're talking about, some of the trends, so they can form their own opinion. Okay, so that's kind of the second part of this. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the question. You have to explain the Metro-sexuality thing, because that's too good not to pass over.
Okay, so I was working on a brand called Peroni, which was owned by SAB Miller, which quite ironically was part of the large corporation that became Philip Morris International, and then they all separated the companies. And they came to me and they wanted to understand where a full calorie light beer could live. And at the same time, we were my co-authors and I were just finishing a book called Buzz, and I wanted to prove that you could buzz market something without spending a lot of money. And this is kind of a nasty story. There was this kind of geeky guy in our office, and without telling you his name, on my little pin board was this word metrosexual circled, because it had been used 7 times in history. But one of my friends had pinpointed that this guy, maybe he's not really a jackass, maybe he's just a metrosexual. So it was on my pin board. And I started seeing this data, and it said that men felt they were no longer guaranteed to be the CEO of the boardroom or the bedroom.
There comes a time when dreams become a reality, when you see your vision materialize into a true work of art. And the only way to get there is to choose a general contractor who shares that same vision and knows how to bring it to life. At Blue Wave, we aren't so big that we've forgotten where we've come from, and we aren't so small that we can't care for your projects regardless of their size. When your vision deserves safety, perfection, timeliness, and expertise in order to become a reality, trust Blue Wave to get it done right the first time.
But they felt one room in their home that was available to them was the kitchen. And it was the very, very beginning of the whole trend around romances. Men felt that they could actually have meaningful and deep relationships with other men that were not sexual. And then living in New York City at that time, I would often go with gay male friends to gay bars. And I would find out that straight guys would often go there because it was the easiest place for them to talk to women. They would go along with their gay friends. Their female friends would be along. It would be a really easy and non-threatening place to have maybe a deeper conversation than you would have in a singles bar. So I kind of put all these things together. I had this data set, and I shared it with the New York Times, just the qualitative, insightful psychographic stuff. But I attached this word metrosexual that was actually originally identified by a British writer called Mark Simpson. And I kind of identified it, and they ended up doing a focus group with me. It ran on the front page of the New York Times on what is a metrosexual. Before that, I had shared it with a writer in England, and I knew that I was onto something because all of a sudden on the top fold of the Daily Telegraph was this picture of me, and it said, "Man, this woman wonders if you have a future." And it was really partially to identify this space, full calorie light beer. They were up against all the white spirits for Peroni. And the other part of it was to prove that I could buzz something around the world with a really, really low to no budget. And so it was like this, it was kind of like the game for me of filling 24 hours. But there's really important findings now. I mean, if you think about it, Metrosexual Man was born in 2023. We're decades later. And if you think about the crisis surrounding men right now, I mean, I was looking at the newspapers over the weekend. Pretty much every newspaper you pick up talk about men being in crisis, young men being in crisis, boys being in crisis. And then during, I guess, the summer of 2003, I got a book contract to do a book called The Future of Men, which was published by Wiley. Instead of doing the pop culture book I should have done to make a lot of money, no. I had to go be a nerd and research things like the future of sperm, the role of school psychologists in shaping boys, because school psychologists were increasingly becoming female. Male teachers were leaving schools. Schools were becoming environments that are very good for girls, not so good for boys, because schools teach the way boys learn. I even started tracking things like supermarkets are organized around the way women shop. So I don't know if you think about this. When you go into a supermarket, you start in the fruit aisle, you go through, you kind of end up at the butchery area, you end up at the fish shop, you end up in the wine area. Well, men don't shop that way. Men shop for solutions. They want to buy breakfast. They want to buy lunch. They want to buy beer snacks. And so the beer and the pretzels need to be together. The marshmallows and the chocolate and the graham crackers need to be together if they're going to do a barbecue with s'mores, but they need to find the hot dogs and the hot dog rolls and the sauerkraut in the same place. So we've kind of marginalized men in so many places where they could and should have at least equity, if not authority.
That was interesting. I'm sure we could spend 2 hours on that alone, but thanks for letting everyone in on just what that looked like, but that was intriguing. Let me go back to why I reached out to you in the first place, is going back to that PBS special. One of the things that really resonated with me, Marian, was how the futurists were almost de-teching, with AI and everything going on. The word I kept hearing was connectivity, about how no matter what, we as a populace, we're missing connectivity, and the true inspirational people out there, the maybe I'm using the wrong words here, the transcenders, are kind of creating connectivity again. And I made some notes that one of the things I saw was break the trend of now and live for multi-generational. So in other words, and then Ari brought up the thing about cathedral thinking, and I never thought about it, but the cathedral thinking, if you've ever heard of that paradigm, is kind of like, can you imagine back to the 13 or 1400s when they were building cathedrals, and these people knew that these cathedrals would not be done in their lifetime. It would be 2 or 3 generations later that these cathedrals would be done, but yet they were still very proud very open, very engaged in the process of building those cathedrals, knowing that they would never see what it was like at the end. And I'm curious how, with your exposure with other people that think like you and speak on these platforms, what does that mean to you, and what can the audience learn from that?
Look, I think we're all just at a point in time, and there's a whole big, broad future. I can't begin to tell you when the planet's going to corrupt itself, but I could have told you that Mother Nature was pretty angry a decade ago and wrote about it. I could have told you that when we introduced the internet and we introduced internet time, suddenly things were speeding up so that the pace of change was becoming geometric, not arithmetic. And now today, I think people that really do scientific featuring are talking about quantum change. I think we have to recognize the difference between trend spotting and real futurism. I'm a trend spotter. I don't have a vision for the world 100 years from now, so much as my focus is on the vision for the world in 2030, in 2038. My latest book is called The New Megatrends. It came out about a year and a half ago, and I was really focused on what is those next 13, 14 years going to look like, and how are things going to change? And I think, look, the most palpable change I feel is the rise of anxiety. People are anxious about absolutely everything. They seek control because the world feels out of control. How they express that, it's 1,000 different ways. But I think that anxiety, that sense that the planet and we are not in good sync. But also the other piece of it is every trend has an equal and opposite reaction. So there's a yin and yang in trends. So if people are becoming more liberal, they're becoming more conservative. If people are becoming more global, they're becoming more local. On one hand, I even as I did this, I spoke to you about my life all around the world, and yet to me, Tucson's home. And I think about when I'm at home, I think about kind of a 12-mile circumference as my whole universe. I wouldn't think about going to Nogales. I would make a big deal about going to Phoenix. And yet I don't think anything about somebody telling me to get on a plane tomorrow and go to Warsaw or Krakow.
Interesting. In that, and thank you for the definition. I'm glad you set the tone of trend spotting versus futurism. And sorry if I intermixed that earlier. That wasn't the intent.
No. I think it's sort of important, though, because I think futurologists are really caught up in a lot more science fiction than I am. My trends tend to be more pragmatic and actionable.
Well, and that's what I drew away from that PBS special, too. Even though they were called futurists on there, I think they were more in your kind of neck of the woods where they were just looking at the trends and kind of saying, like the one economist from Japan, that was really interesting to see how that cultural difference of the Japanese culture in the anxiety that you're describing today, to see how they can deal with it better than a Western civilization or something to that effect. Which leads me into my next question: is you went down this subject, so I'm going to go further. The polarization of our country with ultra right, ultra left. This weekend I was up camping, and I happened to listen to two girls, and I was blown away. That they were, I would guess, young 20s. They were out on their paddle boards, and I was on the shore and I could listen to them, and they were having an engaged conversation. And for me, I'm gonna stereotype, as a 52-year-old white man, I was so excited to hear them talking, not in a divisive manner, but in a collective manner. She was talking about, she goes, I just don't understand why everyone could be so left. And then the other one was like, I don't understand why anyone could be so right. To hear that there were 20-some-year-olds that are not gravitating towards the extremes, but they were actually talking about how to find a solution of the pragmatic middle that defines probably more of the populace than most people want to accept. So with that, I ask you the question, both of what the way you laid it out and using the Japanese culture as an example. With all your international travel, your international exposure, PMI, everything you had done prior to PMI, what can we glean from the different cultures as far as that trend spotting versus that anxiety, if you will, Marian? I guess I hopefully you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah, like, are we just in a myopic bubble here in the U.S. because we're the U.S.?
No, look, polarization is happening everywhere in the world. If you look what's happening in Hungary, you look what's happening in France, you look what's happening really throughout the modern world, there is the rise of a very, very powerful far right. There's a rise of a left. But remember also what I said to you about the bell curve. The people in the middle tend to kind of get lost in the conversation. And I think that a critical minority on both sides often drives the dialogue. They make the headlines. They're what we're talking about, where a lot of people just want to have a decent life. They want to have their expenses covered. They want their children to be educated. They want their parents to be taken care of in old age. They kind of want to be part of the fabric of the community. But that doesn't lead to clickbait. That doesn't lead to people selling headlines. That's not a very interesting story. My nice next door neighbor that, plans a block party once a year, that's not very exciting. They'd much rather hear about a young radical who did X or Y or Z, or they'd rather hear about, an illegal immigrant who did X, Y, or Z. And people gravitate towards bad news. Horror porn is a trend think about how many crime shows we all watch. I mean, it started maybe with things like Law and Order, and it kind of went from there. I mean, I even find myself in my TikTok feed watching these crime stories. On Reels, I watch these crime stories, and there's always this almost gratitude. Well, it didn't happen to me. Isn't that tragic? How could that happen? I want to understand the psychology of the perpetrator. I want to understand how this person became the victim. But the underlying is, thank goodness it's not me. And I think that real-time media has probably done us a disservice because we're playing up the extremes. And I think, look, what's going on with the current election, it's really playing to all the extremes. It's playing to this incredible issue around age in this country. Each generation feeling that the next generation is too old. Each generation feeling like they need to reinvent the world for themselves and their children. At the same time, it's not new information. I think going back into the 90s, I was writing about the fact that baby boomers never wanted to give up their control and their power. They just keep changing the age of how old is old. If you go back to stuff I'd written in the early 2000s, it was this redefinition of middle youth, because suddenly from 50 to 70 was now middle youth. You were rid of your kids. Your parents were kind of old but healthy, and you were suddenly had discretionary money again, like you had almost in your teenage years when you were living in mom and dad's house. So whatever you earned was discretionary. And so I think this idea about how old is old, I think we've really moved the bar. I mean, when I was growing up, I guess I thought that people in their 50s were ancient. Today, I think about people in their 90s as being ancient. Once upon a time, many years ago, I did a study where we asked people of various ages at what age people stop having sexually active lives. The really interesting thing was every age group pretty much said people 17 years older. So if I asked you in your 30s, you thought it was 47 or so. If I asked you when you were in your 40s, it was 57 or so. If I asked you when you're in your 70s, you said it was 87 or so. So it's everybody just had this threshold. I'm not saying that would still be current and contemporary information today, but it's a very good guidepost for the fact the world is just upside down right now. And we don't know how we're supposed to live each decade, because you used to be able to be a young mom when you were 22 or 32. But today you can be a young mom at 22, 32, or 42. You used to be an old grandma at 72. Today you can be an old grandma at 92. And so I think all the labels, because look, in the trend spotting business, you're looking for the stereotypes. I mean, you're looking for, how do you cluster 33% of people into some kind of stereotype? Or is the leading edge, the people that sort of are trend spreaders, are they at least a third more likely than others to do something? That's where you know a trend's going to pop.
What I wouldn't be doing my job as a host if I didn't ask, Marian, through your eyes and as a trend spotter, how has AI changed your world and the world of your peers?
Oh, that would be called ChatGPT right on my phone. handy dandy tool. I've only asked it so far today 6 questions.
Well, that's pretty good.
I mean, so ChatGPT in today's world is what my public library was to me when I was 14. I had to go there. I had to sit in front of the encyclopedias. I had to basically look for the book. I had to go to the cards and pull the cards out to figure out what I was looking for. This gives me answers to questions I don't even need to formulate till I read the last answer. So I think that, and look, there's 1,000 other things. Yesterday, I had a business problem I wanted to solve, and I just asked if I could write a program merging 2 different databases to identify something, and it wrote the program for me in Python. I don't even know how to use Python. It wrote the program for me. So I feel like I sound like the men I used to work for in the early 90s. When the internet came in, they would say, Marian, oh, let your internet talk to me. And I would make AOL, the sound go on. It would talk to them. Now I feel like, oh God, I'm so glad I'm not going to be around when AI takes over. I don't think AI is going to ever take over. I think the power of AI circa 2026 is going to be what the internet was in 1994 to 1997. The smartest people in the world are going to have access to smarts they never thought they could have. I mean, I built the first online market research company in the early 1990s. I didn't even know how smart it was because I didn't have context about where the world was going. I just knew it was fascinating to sit in my apartment in New York City and ask people questions.
Is it an equalizer, though, in your opinion, or does it increase the divide?
So I've always argued that there's a first world, a second world, a third world, and there's the digitally unconnected. So for the digitally unconnected, it becomes an unpassable chasm. For those who are digitally connected, it puts, with Google alone or Microsoft alone, you can sort of research anything on a desktop or on a telephone. So for those who are unconnected, it is truly not a navigatable world. I mean, I was trying to plan a family vacation potentially in Peru yesterday, and I realized I can do things on my phone, including hire a local who can give me a food tour in Lima. And I'm doing all this, and I'm sending this person a text on WhatsApp. I'm booking the whole thing. And I remember when I used to have to go and get a book out and then get a photos book on what to do in Peru. And yeah, maybe I'll go to Amazon and buy a book, but maybe I won't because I can get everything on my phone. And this way it's portable. I can carry it with me.
I love it. Let's go back to, you briefly talked about your book with the mega trends. I think the audience would love to hear just maybe 5-10 minutes of, take some snippets out of the book, or what's your passion right now, Marian, as far as either educating, disseminating information, opening eyes to some of those mega trends? I mean, where does your passion lie on some of those topics right now?
I think it's really hard to find trends that can make you optimistic. So I think one of the things I try to do is look through a more optimistic filter. I mean, at one level, I could argue, and I've been arguing for about 8 years now, that the country could be headed towards a civil war. On the other hand, it could be headed towards a period of greater empathy and understanding. You think about the trendiness of kindness on one level, and then the trendiness of hate on another level. And so I'm looking at that. I think angst, but with angst comes mindfulness. So it's like, is the world becoming more angst-filled? Absolutely. Are people recognizing that and becoming more mindful? Absolutely. I look at health and wellness. We're living longer, and we're going to have to accept a period in our lives of semi-wellness, but can semi-wellness be a happy and productive and helpful time? Yes, it can. And look, I'm the product of medical developments that a decade ago didn't exist. I mean, immunotherapy as part of my cancer cocktail wouldn't have been possible 15 years ago. And, you get diagnosed and they tell you you're going to have a cocktail of this chemo drug, this immuno drug. This is what to expect. Here's something to take for the side effects. And pretty much the only side effect they've been unable to wipe out is losing your hair. So I think it's important to recognize that the world is moving fast, and yet people are signing up for slow things. I mean, I looked at one resort for a vacation that actually says they don't take, you can't bring a digital tool into the resort. I will say I deleted it from my list. I'm one of these weird trend people. that feel like if I don't monitor the news, the world's going to collapse. So I feel like I need to have my Google alerts on at all times because, and I know it's a famous quote from Tom Brokaw years ago. He sort of said when he went and climbed a mountain, he felt like the world was going to collapse without his supervision. I have to admit, like, I feel that same anxiety. I mean, I woke up after one of my brain surgeries and I first started texting people and they're like, wait, aren't you in the ICU? Aren't you in recovery? Yeah. But I just want to find out what's going on. I mean, I had one of my surgeries.
Your connectivity, Marian.
I had one of my surgeries. It's actually, everyone who knows me talks about this. I went to sleep. I was obviously anesthetized when they were going to choose a pope. And the last thing I evidently said, half under anesthesia, was, I hope to God they don't choose a metrosexual pope. And I woke up and the new pope had been chosen. This is probably 2012, 2013, whenever that pope was chosen. And they were like, do you know what you were saying? But what I know is, like, I had to grab for my phone immediately because I literally came out of the anesthesia saying, did they choose a pope? Because I was curious if they were going to choose the first Black pope. Because if you remember that time, there was some thought of them choosing somebody from Africa or Latin America. And I felt that would be this incredible cultural moment along the lines of the election of President Obama. And I was like, okay, is culture ready to make a shift where the Catholic Church is going to have a different face to it? So I look for those moments, but I always try to find something happy in it all, because otherwise you can get into such a malaise. And I think depression and anxiety are not only a real thing, they're also very trendy. And I think we have to be careful that we don't self-diagnose ourselves into this collective depression.
What I wrote, just to hit on one that I wanted to bring up, just because the demographic of this audience on this podcast, if you can take a few minutes, I think you had this in one of your trends. What is a new collar worker, Marian?
So we used to divide everybody between blue collar and white collar, and new collar is sort of an alternative economy person. They might be a gig person, they might be a tech person, but the old labels just don't work. It's like everything, even the label male and female doesn't always work anymore. If you think about the labels we attach to people or they attach to themselves, I think of new collar as really an expression of the fact that there's a middle, there's a new definition. Like, a lot of these words sound very, like, when you threw that at me, it sounded very trendy. And I was like, God, I didn't really mean it that way. But everything needs a new label because the past is over and the future hasn't come yet.
Well, I didn't think of it as trendy. I think if there's an inquisitive mind out there, like when I was looking through some of your titles of your trend spotting, I thought it was very insightful because when I read the titles, I dug a little deeper and going, oh, I see where Marian's going with this. I see where she's going with this. I just want to, again, I want to open the door so that more of the audience takes away from this podcast and goes, oh, I'm going to go investigate that. Oh, I want to see what Marian was talking about there. And I think, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, sometimes when I'm bored, which is I'm never really bored because I invent things to do, I go on what I call an internet hitchhike. So I'll read an article and then I'll click on a link from the article and I'll read another article. And then so I might start off, let's say, on the Atlantic, or I might start off, let's say, on the New York Post, but I'll click into something else and then I'll go to another paper. I'll go to another magazine. I'll go to somebody's Substack. I'll go to a medium.com. I don't always agree with the people I'm reading, but I can always find a nugget in what they're saying that makes me formulate a question I want to find an answer to, and then I'll keep hitchhiking. So it's a little bit like if I started off in Connecticut and I was going to San Francisco, I might end up in Kansas City for a weekend if I'm just a hitchhiker. And when I was growing up, hitchhiking was safe. I've hitchhiked in the Northeast. I've hitchhiked around Europe. I've hitchhiked in the Middle East. Hitchhiking is not safe anymore, but intellectual hitchhiking is. So I would encourage your listeners to literally block an hour or two and go on an intellectual hitchhike. Let's say they're interested in motocross. Start off with motocross, but then go into that and understand, okay, maybe that leads you to NASCAR. Maybe NASCAR leads you to barbecues. Maybe barbecues lead you to fireplaces. Maybe fireplaces lead you to tiny houses. Maybe tiny houses lead you to living off the grid. Maybe living off the grid leads you back to living in a big city. And you just go on this hitchhike. And for me, that's really magical. And it's a wonderful intellectual escape from the pressure of the real world.
Well, I think it's a tremendous call. I wouldn't say call to action, but a call to discovery of each individual, if you think about it that way. Because back to, not to make it a negative, but we were talking about the divisiveness and the globalization and all those kind of things. If everyone could just take those journeys and, like I said, the awareness of not taking such a polarized side and, back to the hate and all those kind of things, is to find some common ground, to have we're old enough, we can talk about this, have a discussion instead of an argument, right?
So one of the things I did when I was in quarantine was I made a commitment to myself. I probably have moderate, skewing slightly liberal, but moderate views. And I made this commitment to myself to watch 1 hour of Fox, 1 hour of MSNBC for every 1 hour I watched of CNN. And it was mind-blowing because sometimes I would have little yellow stickies by my bed. I would make little yellow sticky notes that I wanted to find out how this thing was being reported on one network, and it's amazing that the same story told through a different lens is a different story. And I think that when you're looking for patterns, because basically trend spotting is pattern recognition, when you're looking for patterns, you need a data point. But remember, data analysis is subjective. I saw that 33% of men felt they couldn't be the CEO of the bedroom or the boardroom. That's a minority. I built it into a story that became almost a majority viewpoint. If you think about word of the year, you think about all of that. Data analysis is very much through a selectively objective lens. I mean, there's a term in sociology called the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And I think it's certainly important because a lot of the hypothesis I build my work on is misplaced concreteness. I identify something I'm starting to see. I use my gut. I use my intuition to build on it. And then I build a numeric case to support my story. But it's rarely with a majority of people agreeing, because that would be already mainstream.
Yeah. Hey, we have a few minutes left, and I want to pose because I know you have a hard stop. My question is, does Marian or PMI, is there a BHAG that's out in front of you right now that they've either challenged you with being that they have the international platform and the conglomerate structure that you have? Or is it something or is there an initiative that you're working on that they're endorsing you on that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, the most important thing I'm working on right now is supporting veterans law clinics across the country, because our veterans who serve are amongst the most underserved by certain things. I mean, they go into military service, they make a big difference for us, they secure our borders. It's totally a bipartisan commitment. I mean, veterans are one of the few issues you can get everybody to agree on, but yet a veteran comes out, they make a small mistake and it could end up blunting their record. A veteran comes out, they don't know how to apply for their education benefits, their mental health benefits. So, we're underwriting. We just announced, I think, the first $750,000 of support for veterans law clinics. And we're going to continue that support. So it's really looking at veterans issues. It's veterans law clinics. And now we're going to look at veterans and mental health. How do we bring the arts and music to veterans? So during their period of healing, they can kind of draw sustenance from the arts.
I'm glad you shared that, because I know that, I think you're friends with Bob Woodruff, and I know that in a bunch of your publicity type things that it's mentioned. So I wanted you to be able to get a little endorsement on there as well.
No, thank you. I mean, look, what the Woodruffs have done since Bob got hurt is it's the most amazing thing I've ever been involved with. I mean, look, I'm a PR person, but nobody ever in their life dreams that they're going to get to do PR around Bruce Springsteen. So for me, that was like, oh my God moment. But I mean, if you think about the hundreds of millions of dollars they've been able to raise for wounded vets with traumatic brain injuries and PTSD, it's just a wonderful organization that I'm just so proud to have been a part of. And I'm just so proud of my friendship with the Woodruffs. And I'm just so proud of, look, my philanthropic work is way more interesting to me than my day work, except for when I'm at my day job. Like when I go home at night, I think about, oh my God, what else can I work? So this is why when they asked me to do corporate citizenship for my final job at PMI, I was like, yes, I can do my day job and my night job together. It's great.
Finally, you're given the freedom.
Right, exactly. So if you think about trends, it goes right back to people seek total integration. For the first time in my life, in my current job description, I have an integrated life. My left side and my right side can be together. My heart and my mind can be together.
Can't end a podcast on a better note than that. So with that, I thank you again. audience, you can Google Marian till it's the end of the world. She's got amazing material out there. I encourage you all to look at it. The trend spotting stuff should be inspirational to everyone. And go find your own journey, like she said. Maybe you'll end up in Kansas City looking at tiny houses too.
You've been listening to the Mac and Blue Show, brought to you by Blue Wave General Contracting. Be sure to subscribe to the Mac and Blue podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Follow JJ Levinsky on LinkedIn and Instagram. Tune in every Monday